So has the UN become too scared of being seen to criticise China? Rights bodies around the world criticising the rights chief of the UN for failing to hold the Chinese government accountable for rights abuses against some minorities. For more, let's bring in now Phil Robertson, Deputy Director, Asia Division of Human Rights Watch. He's in Bangkok. Thanks so much for your time, Phil.
Of course.
Talk to us about Michelle Bachelet's 6-day visit to China. The US says it's a mistake. Do you feel the same?
Well, the High Commissioner's visit to China was really problematic on so many different levels. It's hard to know where to start discussing it. I would say perhaps some of the most disturbing aspects of it were her decision to use China's terms of quote unquote counterterrorism and vocational education to describe the horrific human rights abuses happening in Xinjiang in the far west of the country. You know, we have documented systematic use of imprisonment, forced labor, sexual violence, and destruction of Uyghur and Turkic Muslim ethnic and religious identity. I mean, that's not counterterrorism. That's not vocational education. That is a human rights crisis. And she wandered right into it, saying that she was going to, just discuss this with the officials and really get very little from it.
It's interesting, we've been talking about this for such a long time. The United States has been focused on it, many other nations as well, pushing China on this. There were even calls for a boycott against those Winter Olympic Games because of it too. Let's talk about the role of the United Nations in a situation like this. What can the UN do?
Well, I mean, there's various different points of the UN, and that's part of the problem, but it's also part of the answer. I mean, what we expected here from Michelle Bachelet as the High Commissioner for Human Rights was that she was going to take a principled stance, and that she was going to insist that her presence there, which is a visit that China had been lobbying for a long time, would have to come with certain conditions, and conditions would include, having some sort of structure created to have a UN monitoring system in place for the rights abuses happening in China, having some degree of freedom of movement while she was in the country, and ability to meet people confidentiality without having people staring over their shoulder, the authorities and others. All those things didn't happen. What she really got was a bit of a Chinese dog and pony show as she's being led from this place to that place by the Chinese government officials. Yes, she met with China's president, Xi Jinping, but, access should not come at the expense of principles. And the principles of having something substantive come out of this trip seem to have been forgotten by the UN here.
And a lot of people believe that this has been a spin win for China as well, that they've been able to look at this, show off, the UN's come here, nothing to see here, we took them around, we showed them around, and yet here we are. How does the UN overcome this, and also at a time where China is trying to rally support from many of these Pacific Island nations? Some say it's because they're trying to get more support for China at the UN.
Well, the High Commissioner's office has a report that is an analysis of the rights violations that have been taking place in Xinjiang that they have not yet released. In fact, this is a report that was ready last fall. We were told actually in December that it would be released in a matter of weeks. And it has effectively become a hostage of the High Commissioner's efforts to improve relations with China. She needs to release that report in its entirety. And she needs to release it publicly with clear recommendations of what her office is going to do to bring those recommendations towards implementation. It is unacceptable for the kind of evidence that has been amassed, not only about what has happened in Xinjiang, but also happened in Tibet, and the abuses and repression of civil society across China, for the High Commissioner to engage in a kind of meet and greet kind of visit of this sort without having any substantive outcome. And that report that should have been released before she went to China, because it would have framed the discussions, needs at least now to be released in a minimum to show that there is a degree of independence of that office from powerful member states like China.
I wonder whether the UN now is the right, forum to deal with human rights abuses in China. Money seems to talk, doesn't it? What about, for example, some of the big corporations out there that deal with China, from Disney to their Shanghai Disneyland through to, of course, Apple with Foxconn as well? Do you put pressure on some of these companies to essentially hold China to account, given the place, the responsibility that China has in the global supply chain?
Well, China and certainly those companies need to comply with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. They have to make sure that those business operations don't violate human rights. But many of these companies will say that, hey, we're not in the business of holding governments accountable. It's the other way around. And that is actually the way the UN system works as well. In this instance, I would say that it's important that for the UN, which is the sort of repository for international human rights law and for the international covenants that compose that law, to be playing a leading role. But they need to be supported by other governments who are also prepared to call
Mm.
China out for its rights abuses, and where we can get companies and others to monitor their supply chains and ensure that rights abuses are not taking place, like labor rights abuses or forced labor. A lot of these companies were caught with, production in Xinjiang,
Yeah, yeah.
which was contaminated by forced labor. Those are the sort of things they can do. But there's no replacing the UN Human Rights Council and the Human Rights Office. It has to play a central role, and that's why we're so disappointed that it obviously failed to do so in this instance.
Phil, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.